The Wilson family home stirred to life, a beacon of warmth in the sleepy suburban landscape. The two-story Craftsman, with its weathered brick facade and inviting porch, stood silent to the unfolding drama of an ordinary day. Inside, the air hummed with the familiar rhythm of morning rituals, a calm domestic sound that spoke of love, ambition, and the unbreakable bonds of family. Marcus Wilson, a man whose very presence exuded strength and tenderness in equal measure, moved through the kitchen with practiced ease. His hands, ruined from years of honest work, had prepared breakfast as the freshly brewed coffee mingled with the sizzle of bacon. The morning light filtered through the window, casting a golden halo around his salt and pepper hair. Upstairs, the soft patter of footsteps announced the arrival of Zoe, Marcus's pride and joy. The 12-year-old bounded down the stairs, her backpack slung over one shoulder, a whirlwind of energy and potential. Her curly hair, wild and untamed, bounced with each step, a perfect reflection of her vibrant spirit. As she entered the kitchen, the room seemed to brighten, as if the very walls recognized the brilliance of her presence. "Morning, Dad," Zoe's voice rang out. Marcus turned, his face transforming with a smile that could outshine the sun. In that moment, the bond between father and daughter was easy to see, an invisible thread of love and understanding that connected them across the room. "There's my little genius," Marcus replied, his voice a rumble of affection. He placed a plate stacked high with golden pancakes on the table, watching with delight as Zoe's eyes widened in anticipation. The kitchen, once just a room, became a sanctuary of shared moments and unspoken promises. As they sat down to breakfast, the conversation flowed as freely as the maple syrup Zoe liberally poured over her pancakes. Marcus listened intently, his chest swelling with pride as Zoe recounted her latest triumph, a perfect score on her science project. Her words painted vivid pictures of solar systems and far-off galaxies, her enthusiasm infectious and inspiring. "You're going to change the world someday, kiddo," Marcus said, reaching across the table to ruffle Zoe's hair. Zoe beamed, her smile a reflection of her father's faith, a testament to the power of unconditional love and support. As the clock ticked closer to the start of the school day, their morning routine unfolded with well-practiced precision. Dishes were cleared, lunches packed, and final checks made on homework and permission slips. In the entryway, Marcus knelt to tie Zoe's shoelaces, a ritual that had persisted long past the point of necessity. It was a quiet moment of connection, a chance for father and daughter to share a final moment before facing the world. Outside, the neighborhood had come alive. Children's laughter echoed down the street, mingling with the distant rumble of school buses. The Wilsons' front yard, with its neatly trimmed grass, stood as a testament to Marcus's dedication, not just to his home, but to creating a stable, beautiful world for his daughter. As they stepped onto the porch, the morning sun embraced them, casting long shadows across the lawn. Marcus placed a gentle hand on Zoe's shoulder, a gesture both protective and encouraging. "Remember, Zoe," he said, "you can do anything you set your mind to. Your mom would be so proud of you." The mention of Zoe's mother, gone but never forgotten, added a bittersweet note to the morning air. Zoe nodded, her eyes shining with determination and the hint of unshed tears. She wrapped her arms around her father's waist, burying her face in his chest for a moment. As they parted, both father and daughter stood a little taller, fortified by their bond. Zoe set off down the sidewalk, her backpack bouncing with each step. Marcus watched her go, his heart swelling with a mixture of pride, hope, and the bittersweet realization that each day brought her closer to the woman she would become. As Zoe disappeared around the corner, Marcus turned back to the house, ready to face his own day, carrying with him the warmth of their shared morning and the knowledge that, ordinary as it might seem, this day, like every day, was a gift to be cherished. In the bustling heart of the city, Marcus Wilson sat hunched over his desk, his hands, so deft and sure in the familiar confines of his kitchen, now fumbled with papers and pens, his mind still lingering on the image of Zoe's retreating form. The ring of his cell phone pierced the air. Marcus's heart leaped, a primal instinct sensing the harbinger of change in that insistent tone. With trembling fingers, he answered, his deep voice wavering as he spoke. Marcus Wilson speaking. The words that followed crashed over him like a tidal wave, each syllable a blow to his very foundations. Mr. Wilson, this is Principal Sawyer from Westbrook Middle School. I'm calling about Zoe. She's not in class. We can't find her anywhere on campus. Time seemed to freeze, the world narrowing to a pinpoint of disbelief and dawning horror. Marcus's breath caught in his throat, his free hand gripping the edge of his desk with white-knuckled intensity. The bustling office faded away, replaced by the frantic beating of his heart. What do you mean, she's not there? Marcus's voice, usually so strong and reassuring, came out as a strangled whisper. She left for school this morning. I watched her go. The memory of Zoe's smile flashed before his eyes. As the principal's voice continued, filled with concern and carefully measured reassurances, Marcus felt his world tilt on its axis. The ordinary day he had taken for granted now seemed like a distant dream, shattered by the nightmare of uncertainty that stretched before him. With a burst of frantic energy, Marcus surged to his feet, his chair clattering to the floor behind him. Heads turned, curious eyes watching as he grabbed his jacket and car keys, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. I'm on my way, he barked into the phone, already striding towards the exit. The drive to Westbrook Middle School was a blur of honking horns and flashing traffic lights. Marcus's hands gripped the steering wheel with desperate intensity, his knuckles white against the dark leather. Every red light was an eternity, every slow-moving vehicle an insurmountable obstacle between him and his missing daughter. As he moved through traffic, Marcus's mind raced, conjuring 1,000 terrifying scenarios. Each passing moment felt like a lifetime, the weight of fear and uncertainty pressing down on him with suffocating force. The streets of the city, once so familiar and benign, now seemed fraught with hidden dangers, a potential threat to his precious Zoe. Pulling into the school parking lot with a screech of tires, Marcus leaped from the car, his long legs eating up the distance to the main entrance. The school building loomed before him, a fortress holding secrets he desperately needed to unlock. Bursting through the doors, Marcus found himself in a maelstrom of activity. Teachers huddled in small groups, their faces etched with worry. The air was thick with tension, the usual cheerful chaos of a middle school replaced by a heavy silence broken only by hushed whispers. Principal Sawyer appeared at Marcus's elbow, her usual composure cracking under the weight of the situation. Mr. Wilson, thank you for coming so quickly. We're doing everything we can to locate Zoe. Her words, meant to reassure, only served to heighten Marcus's sense of helplessness. As he followed the principal to her office, Marcus's eyes darted from face to face, searching for any sign of his daughter. Each unfamiliar visage was a reminder of Zoe's absence, each empty classroom a silent accusation. The hallways, lined with brightly colored lockers and motivational posters, seemed to mock him with their cheerful normalcy. In the principal's office, Marcus sank into a chair, his large frame seeming to shrink under the burden of his fears. As Principal Sawyer began to recount the morning's events, her voice faded to a distant murmur. Marcus's gaze fixed on a family photo on her desk, the smiling faces a cruel reminder of the joy that had been so abruptly torn from his grasp. The world spun on, indifferent to the agony of a father's heart laid bare, to the desperate prayers whispered in the silence between breaths. As the search for Zoe intensified, Marcus Wilson sat motionless, his ordinary day shattered, clinging to the hope that his little girl, his shining star, would soon be back in his arms, safe from the shadows that had so unexpectedly descended upon them. Each empty classroom he passed was a dagger to his heart, a silent reminder of Zoe's inexplicable absence. The colorful posters adorning the walls, once symbols of inspiration and growth, now seemed to mock him with their cheery optimism. As Marcus rounded yet another corner, His ears pricked at a sound barely audible, a muffled sob, so faint it might have been a trick of the mind, stopped him in his tracks. He held his breath, straining to hear, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. There it was again, a whimper, soft and broken, emanating from behind a door marked girls' restroom. Marcus's world narrowed to that single point, all other sounds fading away as recognition dawned. He knew that sound, and had comforted it in the dark hours of night, when memories of her mother grew too heavy for Zoe to bear alone. With a burst of desperate energy, Marcus lunged for the door, propriety forgotten in the face of paternal instinct. He burst into the bathroom, the harsh fluorescent light reflecting off sterile white tiles, momentarily blinding him. As his eyes adjusted, he scanned the row of stalls, his heart in his throat. Zoe, his voice, usually so strong and assured, cracked with emotion. "Baby girl, are you in here?" A gasp, followed by a hiccuping sob, came from the last stall. Marcus moved with the speed of a man possessed, his long strides eating up the distance in seconds. He dropped to his knees before the locked door, uncaring of the cold, hard tiles biting into his skin. "Zoe, it's Dad. Please, sweetheart, open the door." There was a moment of agonizing silence, broken only by the sound of ragged breathing from both sides of the thin metal barrier. Then, with excruciating slowness, the lock slid open. Marcus gently pushed the door, revealing a sight that shattered his heart into a million pieces. Zoe, his vibrant, brilliant little girl, sat huddled on the floor, her knees drawn up to her chest, her face streaked with tears. Her curls, so bouncy and full of life this morning, now hung limp and tangled around her face. "Oh, Zoe," Marcus breathed, gathering her into his arms without hesitation. She melted into his embrace, her small body racked with sobs that seemed to come from the very depths of her soul. Marcus held her close, murmuring soothing words into her hair. The bathroom, with its harsh lights, faded away. In that moment, the world consisted only of a father and his daughter, locked in an embrace that spoke of love. As Zoe's sobs gradually subsided, Marcus gently pulled back, cupping her tear-stained face in his hands. "What happened, baby? Why are you here? We've been so worried." Zoe's lower lip trembled, fresh tears welling up in her eyes. I couldn't do it, Dad. I couldn't go to class. I'm not smart enough. I'm not good enough. I'll never be like Mom." Marcus felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. The weight of Zoe's words, the depth of her pain, hit him with the force of a tidal wave. How long had she been carrying this burden? How had he not seen it? "Oh, sweetheart," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are more than good enough. You're brilliant and kind and so strong. Your mom would be so proud of you, just as I am, every single day." Zoe looked up at him, her eyes wide and vulnerable. "Really? But I messed up. I ran away. I scared everyone." Marcus shook his head, a sad smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "We all make mistakes, Zoe. What matters is that you're safe, and we're together. We'll figure everything else out, I promise." As he spoke, the bathroom door burst open, Principal Sawyer rushing in with a look of mingled relief and concern on her face. "Oh, thank goodness," she breathed, taking in the scene before her. Marcus stood, lifting Zoe into his arms as if she were still a small child. She clung to him, burying her face in his neck, her tears soaking into his shirt collar. As they moved towards the door, towards the chaos and questions that awaited them, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. As they walked down the hallway, Marcus's mind was already racing, planning how to help his daughter, how to lighten the burden she'd been carrying alone for far too long. The ordinary day that had turned into a nightmare was now transforming once again. Principal Sawyer perched behind her imposing desk, her usual composure cracking under the weight of the situation. The late afternoon sun slanted through the Venetian blinds, casting alternating bands of light and shadow across the room, a visual metaphor for the revelations about to unfold. "Zoe, sweetheart," Marcus began, his voice a gentle rumble that belied the turmoil roiling beneath the surface. "Can you tell us what's been going on? Why were you hiding in the bathroom?" Zoe's small body tensed against her father's chest, her fingers clutching at his shirt as if it were a lifeline. She lifted her tear-stained face, her eyes. It's Miss Hartley," Zoe whispered, her voice barely audible above the gentle hum of the air conditioning. The name hung in the air like a poisonous cloud, and Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "What about Ms. Hartley, honey?" Principal Sawyer leaned forward, her brow furrowed with concern. Zoe took a shuddering breath, and the floodgates opened. Words poured out of her in a torrent of anguish and fear, each syllable a dagger to Marcus's heart. She's been saying things, horrible things. She tells me I'm stupid, that I'll never amount to anything. That Mom would be disappointed in me. Marcus's arms tightened around his daughter, a primal urge to protect warring with the shock of her words. The room seemed to spin around him, the carefully ordered world he thought he knew crumbling to dust. "But that's not all," Zoe continued, her voice growing stronger even as fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "Yesterday, after class, she grabbed my arm. She said if I ever told anyone, she'd make sure I failed everything. That she'd hurt me." The silence that followed Zoe's confession was deafening. Marcus felt as if he'd been plunged into icy water, every nerve in his body screaming in protest. The thought of his precious daughter enduring such cruelty, such betrayal from someone meant to nurture and guide her, was almost more than he could bear. Principal Sawyer's face had drained of color, her professional mask slipping to reveal genuine horror. "Zoe," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "I want you to know that you are incredibly brave for telling us this. What Ms. Hartley did is wrong, and I promise you, she will never hurt you again." Marcus found himself on his feet, still cradling Zoe in his arms, his body thrumming with a potent mixture of rage and anguish. The room suddenly felt too small, the walls closing in on him as the full impact of Zoe's words sank in. "How?" he choked out, his voice raw with emotion. "How could this happen? How could we not know?" The questions hung in the air, unanswerable and accusatory. Zoe's small hand came up to touch his face, her gesture so tender it nearly broke him. "I was scared, Dad," she whispered. I thought maybe she was right, that I wasn't good enough." Marcus's heart shattered anew at her words. He turned to face her fully, his large hands framing her delicate face. "Listen to me, Zoe Wilson," he said, his voice fierce with love and determination. "You are brilliant and kind, and so much stronger than you know. No one, not Ms. Hartley, not anyone, has the right to make you feel less than the amazing person you are." As he spoke, Marcus felt a shift within himself. The initial shock and rage began to crystallize into something harder, more focused. A steely resolve took root in his heart, a promise to protect his daughter and seek justice for the pain she had endured. Principal Sawyer rose from her desk, her movements deliberate and purposeful. "Mr. Wilson, Zoe, I want you both to know that we take this extremely seriously. Ms. Hartley will be suspended immediately pending a full investigation. We'll need to involve the authorities." Her words faded into the background as Marcus locked eyes with his daughter. In that moment, a silent understanding passed between them. The road ahead would be difficult, fraught with challenges and painful revelations, but they would face it together, their bond stronger than any force that sought to break them. As the last rays of sunlight faded from the office, Marcus made a silent vow. He would move heaven and earth to ensure that Zoe never again doubted her worth, never again felt the sting of cruel words or the threat of violence. The ordinary day that had begun with pancakes and laughter had transformed into a crucible, forging a new chapter in their lives. With Zoe still held close in his protective embrace, Marcus turned to face Principal Sawyer, ready to take the first steps on this unexpected journey. But for Marcus and Zoe Wilson, nothing would ever be the same again. The Wilson home, once a sanctuary of love and laughter, now thrummed with an electric current of rage and determination. The living room bore witness to a father's anguish transformed into iron resolve. Marcus Wilson paced the length of the room, his imposing frame casting long, restless shadows across the family photos that adorned the walls. Each image of Zoe's smiling face, capturing moments of unbridled joy and innocence, fueled the inferno blazing in Marcus's chest. His hands, usually so gentle and sure, now clenched and unclenched at his sides, itching for action, for justice, for something tangible to fight against. Zoe lay curled on the sofa, her small form dwarfed by the overstuffed cushions, her eyes red-rimmed and distant. The weight of her confession seemed to press down on her, making her appear even smaller, more vulnerable. The sight of his daughter, so broken and afraid, sent fresh waves of agony coursing through Marcus's veins. The clock on the mantel ticked relentlessly. Marcus's gaze fell on the phone sitting on the coffee table, its presence both a lifeline and a harbinger of the storm to come. "Enough," Marcus growled, his voice low and dangerous, startling Zoe from her reverie. "Enough of this. Enough waiting." With 3 long strides, he crossed the room and snatched up the phone. His fingers, trembling with a mixture of fury and fear, hovered over the keypad. For a heartbeat, doubt crept in, whispering of consequences and complications. But then Zoe's tearful confession echoed in his mind, drowning out all hesitation. Marcus punched in the numbers with decisive force. 9-11. The dial tone seemed to stretch for an eternity, each ring amplifying the tension that coiled tighter and tighter in Marcus's chest. Zoe sat up, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope, silently watching her father. 911. What's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice, calm and professional, cut through the charged atmosphere of the living room. Marcus took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. "My name is Marcus Wilson. I need to report a case of child abuse and threats made against my daughter by her teacher, Ms. Hartley, at Westbrook Middle School." Zoe gasped softly, a sound somewhere between relief and terror. Marcus locked eyes with her, pouring all his love and reassurance into that single look as he continued to relay the details to the dispatcher. As Marcus spoke, the familiar space, filled with memories of movie nights and homework sessions, now felt like the command center of a battle about to be waged. The family photos on the walls were no longer just mementos, but silent witnesses to this pivotal moment. Outside, the sun had long since set, but the Wilson home stood firm, a beacon of light and fierce protection against the encroaching shadows. Marcus paced as he talked, his free hand gesticulating forcefully, painting a vivid picture of Zoe's ordeal for the unseen dispatcher. Each detail he shared seemed to lift a weight from Zoe's shoulders, her posture straightening almost imperceptibly as her father gave voice to the pain she had carried alone for so long. "Yes, I understand," Marcus said, his tone brooking no argument. "We'll be here waiting. Thank you." He ended the call, the soft beep of the phone seeming to echo in the suddenly quiet room. Turning to Zoe, Marcus knelt before her, taking her small hands in his. "The police are on their—" The Wilson home, once a sanctuary of love and laughter, now thrummed with an electric current of rage and determination. The living room bore witness to a father's anguish transformed into iron resolve. Marcus Wilson paced the length of the room, his imposing frame casting long, restless shadows across the family photos that adorned the walls. Each image of Zoe's smiling face, capturing moments of unbridled joy and innocence, fueled the inferno blazing in Marcus's chest. His hands, usually so gentle and sure, now clenched and unclenched at his sides, itching for action, for justice, for something tangible to fight against. Zoe lay curled on the sofa, her small form dwarfed by the overstuffed cushions, her eyes red-rimmed and distant. The weight of her confession seemed to press down on her, making her appear even smaller, more vulnerable. The sight of his daughter, so broken and afraid, sent fresh waves of agony coursing through Marcus's veins. The clock on the mantel ticked relentlessly. Marcus's gaze fell on the phone sitting on the coffee table, its presence both a lifeline and a harbinger of the storm to come. "Enough," Marcus growled, his voice low and dangerous, startling Zoe from her reverie. "Enough of this. Enough waiting." With 3 long strides, he crossed. At the epicenter of this maelstrom stood Marcus Wilson, a tower of barely contained fury, his broad shoulders squared against the weight of injustice. Beside him, Zoe seemed to shrink into herself, her small hand clasped tightly in her father's, drawing strength from his unwavering presence. The contrast between them was stark, a giant sequoia sheltering a delicate sapling from an approaching storm. Principal Sawyer emerged from her office, her usual composed demeanor fracturing under the weight of the unfolding drama. Her eyes, wide with a mixture of concern and barely concealed panic, darted between Marcus, Zoe, and the main entrance where the first uniformed officers were now appearing. "Mr. Wilson," she began, her voice strained with forced calm, "perhaps we could discuss this further before involving the authorities. I'm sure we can come to some sort of—" "No more discussions," Marcus cut her off, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that seemed to reverberate through the very foundations of the school. "No more sweeping things under the rug. It's time for action." A team of police officers strode into the hallway, their presence immediately dominating the space. The lead officer, a stern-faced woman with sharp eyes that missed nothing, approached the group with measured steps. "I'm Detective Ramirez," she announced, her gaze sweeping over the assembled faces before settling on Marcus and Zoe. "We received a report of child abuse and threats made by a teacher. Who can tell me what's going on here?" Before Marcus could respond, Principal Sawyer stepped forward, her hands fluttering nervously. "Detective, I assure you this is all a misunderstanding. Ms. Hartley is one of our most respected educators. Surely there's been some confusion." "There's no confusion," Marcus interjected, his voice cutting through. He locked eyes with Detective Ramirez, the raw pain and determination in his gaze speaking volumes. "My daughter has been bullied, humiliated, and threatened by her teacher, Ms. Hartley. And it stops now." The detective's expression remained impassive, but something in her eyes softened as she turned to Zoe. Kneeling down to the girl's eye level, she spoke gently. "Zoe, is that right? Can you tell me what happened?" Zoe, her face pale but resolute, nodded slowly. As she began to speak, her voice barely above a whisper, the hallway seemed to hold its breath. Principal Sawyer's attempts to interject were silenced by a single, quelling look from Detective Ramirez. As Zoe's story unfolded, punctuated by quiet sobs and comforting squeezes from her father's hand, other officers moved through the school with purpose, their radios crackling with terse updates. The sound of a distant door being opened echoed through the corridors. Ms. Hartley's classroom, now a potential crime scene. Marcus stood like a sentinel, his eyes never leaving his daughter as she poured out her pain to the detective. His jaw clenched and unclenched, each revelation stoking the fire of his determination. This was more than a fight for justice. It was a battle for his child's future, for her sense of self-worth. As Zoe's testimony drew to a close, Detective Ramirez straightened, her face a mask of professional concern tinged with genuine empathy. "Thank you, Zoe. You've been very brave." Turning to the other officers, she began issuing rapid-fire orders, setting in motion the machinery of justice. Principal Sawyer, her earlier attempts at damage control now lying in tatters at her feet, sagged against the wall. The reality of the situation, the betrayal of trust, the failure of the system she represented, seemed to crash down upon her all at once. But for Marcus and Zoe, standing united in the eye of this storm, a new sense of hope began to blossom. The school, once a place of fear and hidden torment for Zoe, was being transformed before their eyes into a battleground where truth would finally prevail. And as Marcus held Zoe close, watching the authorities do their work, he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, stronger for having taken this stand. At the heart of this tempest stood Marcus Wilson, a colossus of paternal protection, his large frame casting a long shadow across the polished linoleum floor. Zoe, nestled against his side, seemed both diminished and fortified by her father's unwavering presence. Detective Ramirez moved through the school with predatory grace, her keen eyes missing nothing as she coordinated the unfolding investigation. The click of her sensible heels echoed through the corridors. "We'll need to speak with every student in Miss Hartley's class," Ramirez announced, her voice carrying the weight of authority, "and every staff member who might have witnessed or heard anything suspicious." Principal Sawyer, her earlier composure now in tatters, nodded mutely. The gravity of the situation seemed to press down upon her shoulders, aging her visibly with each passing moment. "Of course, Detective. Whatever you need." As if summoned by some unspoken signal, a steady stream of bleary-eyed students began to trickle into the school, accompanied by confused and concerned parents. The main entrance, usually a portal of morning rushes and afternoon escapes, now served as a gateway to revelations that would change lives forever. Marcus watched this procession with a mixture of sorrow and grim satisfaction. Each young face that passed, some tear-stained, others marked by fear or defiance, was a reminder of the stakes at hand. This wasn't just about Zoe anymore. It was about every child who had ever suffered in silence, every voice that had been stifled by intimidation or indifference. "Dad," Zoe whispered, her voice barely audible above the growing murmur of activity. "What's going to happen now?" Marcus knelt down, bringing himself eye level with his daughter. "Now, sweetheart," he said, his voice a low rumble of reassurance. "We tell the truth, all of it, and we make sure that no one can ever hurt you or any other child like this again." As he spoke, a flurry of activity near Miss Hartley's classroom caught their attention. Officers emerged, carrying boxes of confiscated materials, grade books, personal journals, a laptop computer. Detective Ramirez approached, her face a mask of professional detachment belied by the compassion in her eyes. "Zoe," she said gently, "we're going to need to talk to you again. But this time, we'll have a specialist here to help. Someone who's trained to talk to kids about difficult things." Marcus felt Zoe tense against him, her small hand gripping his with renewed fear. But before he could protest, she surprised him by straightening her shoulders and nodding. "Okay," she said, her voice small but steady. "I can do that." Pride swelled in Marcus's chest, threatening to overwhelm him. His little girl, so brave in the face of such adversity. He squeezed her hand, pouring all his love and support into that simple gesture. As the night wore on, the school transformed into a hive of activity. Classrooms became impromptu interview rooms, the cafeteria a waiting area for anxious parents and students. The truth, so long suppressed. At the heart of this tempest stood Marcus Wilson, a colossus of paternal protection, his large frame casting a long shadow across the polished linoleum floor. Zoe, nestled against his side, seemed both diminished and fortified by her father's unwavering presence. Detective Ramirez moved through the school with predatory grace, her keen eyes missing nothing as she coordinated the unfolding investigation. The click of her sensible heels echoed through the corridors. "We'll need to speak with every student in Miss Hartley's class," Ramirez announced, her voice carrying the weight of authority, "and every staff member who might have witnessed or heard anything suspicious." Principal Sawyer, her earlier composure now in tatters, nodded mutely. The gravity of the situation seemed to press down upon her shoulders, aging her visibly with each passing moment. "Of course, Detective. Whatever you need." As if summoned by some unspoken signal, a steady stream of bleary-eyed students began to trickle into the school, accompanied by confused and concerned parents. The main entrance, usually a portal of morning rushes and afternoon escapes, now served as a gateway to revelations that would change lives forever. Marcus watched this procession with a mixture of sorrow and grim satisfaction. Each young face that passed, some tear-stained, others marked by fear or defiance, was a reminder of the stakes at hand. This wasn't just about Zoe anymore. It was about every child who had ever suffered in silence, every voice that had been stifled by intimidation or indifference. Dad. Marcus Wilson stood on his front porch, a colossus of determination and weariness, his broad shoulders squared against the weight of public scrutiny. Beside him, Zoe clung to his hand. The contrast between them was stark, a mighty oak sheltering a tender sapling from the howling winds of public opinion. As the day wore on, a steady stream of cars began to crawl past the Wilson residence, their occupants craning their necks for a glimpse of the family at the heart of the scandal. Some slowed to a crawl, eyes wide with curiosity or judgment. Others honked in support, flashing thumbs-up signs through open windows. The cacophony of car horns and raised voices shattered the usual suburban tranquility, a discordant symphony of a community divided. Across the street, a group of parents had gathered, their faces a mosaic of emotions: concern, anger, disbelief. Their whispered conversations carried on the breeze, fragments reaching Marcus's ears like barbed arrows. "How could we not have known?" one mother lamented, her voice thick with guilt and horror. "Are we sure it's true?" Another countered, skepticism dripping from every word. "Miss Hartley's always been so dedicated." Marcus felt Zoe's grip on his hand tighten. He squeezed back gently, a silent reassurance that he was there, that he would always be there. As if summoned by the rising tensions, a news van rounded the corner, its satellite dish a harbinger of the media storm about to descend upon their quiet neighborhood. Marcus watched its approach with a mixture of dread and resolve. The time for privacy had passed. Now was the moment to stand firm in the light of truth, no matter how harsh its glare. "Dad," Zoe whispered, her voice barely audible above the growing murmur of the gathering crowd. "Are we doing the right thing?" "Sweetheart," he said, his voice a low rumble of certainty, "standing up for what's right is always the right thing to do, no matter how hard it gets." As he spoke, a commotion near the edge of their property caught their attention. A small group of supporters had arrived, bearing homemade signs with messages of encouragement and solidarity. "We believe Zoe," one placard proclaimed in bold, colorful letters. "Teachers protect, not abuse," declared another. The sight of these unexpected allies brought a fresh wave of emotion crashing over Marcus. He felt his throat tighten, his vision blurring with unused tears. This was why they fought, not just for Zoe, but for every child who had ever suffered in silence, for every parent who had ever felt helpless in the face of institutional indifference. But even as hope bloomed, the thorns of opposition made themselves known. A car screeched to a halt in front of the house, and out stepped Veronica Hartley, Ms. Hartley's sister and fiercest defender. Her face was a mask of righteous indignation as she strode towards the Wilsons, her voice carrying across the lawn like a battle cry. "How dare you?" she spat, her words dripping with venom. "My sister has dedicated her life to teaching. You're destroying her reputation, her career, over what? A child's imagination." Marcus felt a surge of anger rise within him, threatening to overwhelm his hard-won composure. But before he could respond, Zoe stepped forward, her small frame seeming to grow with newfound strength. "It's not imagination," she said, her voice clear and steady. "It's the truth, and I'm not the only one." A hush fell over the gathered crowd, the weight of Zoe's words hanging in the air like a physical presence. In that moment, the ordinary suburban street transformed into an arena of justice and truth, where the voice of a child could shake the foundations of long-held beliefs and shatter the chains of silence. As the day wore on, more people arrived, supporters and skeptics, journalists and curious onlookers. Marcus and Zoe remained on their porch, united against the tide of public opinion, their stance a silent testimony to the power of love and the unyielding pursuit of justice. As darkness fell, the crowd gradually dispersed, leaving behind a neighborhood forever changed. The ordinary day had given way to an extraordinary reckoning, a crucible in which a community's values and beliefs would be tested and reshaped. Marcus looked down at Zoe, saw the mixture of exhaustion and determination in her eyes, and knew that their fight was far from over. But here, In this moment, with truth finally given voice, and the first seeds of change taking root, he allowed himself to feel the stirrings of hope. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, stronger for having taken this. The imposing facade of Westbrook Middle School loomed before Marcus and Zoe Wilson, its brick walls and gleaming windows no longer a symbol of education and growth, but a fortress of secrets and betrayal. Marcus stood at the foot of the stone steps leading to the main entrance, his broad shoulders squared and jaw set with determination. Beside him, Zoe seemed both diminished and empowered by her father's presence. As they ascended the steps, the weight of their purpose seemed to press down upon them, each footfall echoing with the gravity of their mission. The school's main office, usually a hive of activity and chatter, fell into an uneasy silence as Marcus and Zoe entered. The secretary's cheerful greeting died on her lips, her eyes widening in recognition and apprehension. The air itself seemed to thicken, charged with the electricity of impending confrontation. No more privacy, Marcus interrupted, his voice a low rumble that seemed to reverberate through the very foundations of the school. No more closed doors. This ends now, and it ends in the open. As if summoned by his words, the door to the conference room swung open, revealing a gathering of school administrators and board members. Their faces were a mosaic of emotions: concern, defensiveness, and barely concealed panic. The stage was set for a reckoning long overdue. Marcus strode into the room, Zoe close by his side, their entrance causing a ripple of unease among the assembled officials. The conference table, a massive oak monstrosity that usually dominated the space, seemed to shrink in the face of Marcus's righteous anger. "Gentlemen, ladies," Marcus began, his voice controlled but vibrating with intensity. "We're here because you failed. You failed my daughter. You failed every child in this school. And now, you're going to make it right." The superintendent, a silver-haired man whose tailored suit couldn't hide his discomfort, leaned forward. "Mr. Wilson, we understand your concerns, but I assure you, we take the safety of our students very seriously. Do you?" Marcus cut him off, his eyes flashing with barely contained fury. "Because from where I'm standing, you allowed a predator to terrorize children for years. You ignored warnings, dismissed complaints, and protected the abuser instead of the abused." His words hung in the air like physical blows, each syllable a dagger of truth piercing the carefully constructed facade of institutional indifference. The room seemed to hold its breath, the tension so thick it could be cut with a knife. Zoe, who had been silent until now, suddenly stepped forward. Her voice, though soft, carried a strength that belied her years. "You knew," she said, her eyes moving from one guilty face to another. "You all knew, and you did nothing." Several board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unable to meet the accusing gaze of the child they had failed to protect. Principal Sawyer's face crumpled, the weight of her complicity finally too heavy to bear. Marcus placed a supportive hand on Zoe's shoulder, drawing strength from her courage even as he lent her his own. "We're not here for apologies," he continued, his voice low and dangerous. "We're here for action. I want Ms. Hartley fired and reported to the authorities. I want a full investigation into every complaint that was ignored. And I want a comprehensive plan to ensure this never happens again. Not to Zoe, not to any child." The conference room, with its motivational posters and outdated educational charts, seemed to shrink around them, the very walls closing in under the weight of long-buried truths finally brought to light. As Marcus laid out his demands, his voice rising and falling like the tide of justice itself, the faces of the school officials transformed. Denial gave way to resignation. Defensiveness crumbled in the face of irrefutable truth. The ordinary conference room had become an arena of reckoning, where the power dynamics of an entire educational system were being rewritten in real time. Outside the windows, life went on in the schoolyard. Children laughing, playing, blissfully unaware of the seismic shift occurring within these walls. But in this room, in this moment, a new future was being forged. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Marcus and Zoe stood united, an unbreakable team in the face of institutional resistance. The battle was far from over, but in this crucible of confrontation, the first seeds of real change had been planted. The ordinary school day had given way to an extraordinary moment of truth and accountability. And as Marcus looked down at Zoe, saw the mixture of fear and hope in her eyes, he knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, stronger for having taken this stand, ready to build a world where no child would ever have to suffer. And at the heart of this concrete maze stood Marcus and Zoe Wilson, a fortress of familial love amidst a sea of uncertainty. Marcus's imposing frame dwarfed the surrounding lockers, his eyes scanning the corridor with the intensity of a sentinel on high alert. Beside him, Zoe seemed both diminished and fortified by her father's presence, her small hand clasped tightly in his larger one. Suddenly, a locker slammed shut with a metallic clang that shattered the uneasy quiet. Marcus instinctively pulled Zoe closer, his body tensing for a fight. But as the echo faded, a small figure emerged from around the corner, hesitant steps bringing into view a face that Zoe recognized all too well. Ethan. Zoe's voice was barely above a whisper, a mixture of surprise and trepidation coloring her tone. The newcomer, a boy no older than Zoe herself, stood trembling at the end of the hallway. His eyes, wide with a swirling tempest of fear and determination, darted between Zoe and Marcus. I need to talk to you," Ethan stammered, his voice cracking under the weight of unspoken truths. "About Ms. Hartley. About what I saw." The words hung in the air, each syllable heavy with potential. Marcus felt Zoe stiffen beside him, her grip on his hand tightening. He knelt down, bringing himself eye level with both children, his face a mask of gentle encouragement. "It's okay, Ethan," he said softly, his deep voice reverberating through the empty hallway. "You're safe here. Whatever you need to say, we're here to listen." Ethan took a shuddering breath, his small frame seeming to grow with resolve. "I saw it all," he blurted out, the words tumbling from his lips like water from a broken dam. "The way Ms. Hartley treated Zoe, the things she said when she thought no one was listening. I wanted to speak up, but I was so scared. She threatened to fail me if I ever said anything." Zoe gasped, a sound of pain and vindication intermingled. Marcus felt a surge of emotions, anger at the injustice, pride in Ethan's courage, and a fierce protectiveness that threatened to overwhelm him. As Ethan's story unfolded, the sterile school hallway transformed into something else entirely. The lockers, once cold and impersonal, now stood as silent witnesses to a moment of profound bravery and solidarity. Ethan's words painted a vivid picture of the torment Zoe had endured. The subtle jabs, the public humiliations, the threats veiled in the language of academic concern. With each revelation, Marcus felt his resolve harden, his determination to see justice done crystallizing into an unbreakable vow. Zoe, who had been silent throughout Ethan's confession, suddenly stepped forward. Without a word, she placed a hand on her classmate's shoulder, a gesture of support and understanding that spoke volumes. Ethan's eyes met hers, and in that moment, a bond forged in shared adversity was sealed. As Ethan's story came to a close, the hallways seemed to exhale, as if the very walls had been holding their breath. The air, once heavy with secrets, now felt lighter, charged with the potential for change. Marcus stood, placing a gentle hand on each child's shoulder. "Thank you, Ethan," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "What you've done today, it's incredibly brave. You've not only helped Zoe, but you might have helped a lot of other kids too." Marcus's gaze swept the hallway, taking in the motivational posters and student artwork that suddenly seemed like a mockery of the school's failure to protect its most vulnerable. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of a promise. "Now," he said, "we will make sure this never happens again, to anyone." As they stood there, this unlikely trio united by truth and courage, the ordinary school hallway had become hallowed ground. It was a crucible where secrets were laid bare, where silence was shattered, and where the first tremors of real change began to rumble through the very foundations of Westbrook Middle School. They had taken the first step on a journey toward justice, their path illuminated by the unquenchable light of truth and the indomitable spirit of those who refuse to be silenced. In this moment, the story of Zoe and Marcus Wilson transcended personal vindication. It became a rallying cry for every child who had ever suffered in silence, for every parent who had ever felt helpless in the face of institutional indifference. The ordinary school day had given way to an extraordinary reckoning, a crucible in which the very fabric of trust, accountability, and justice would be rewoven. As Marcus led Zoe and Ethan towards the principal's office, their steps echoing through the now sacred halls, he knew that their fight was far from over. But with each step, with each truth revealed, they moved closer to a world where no child would ever have to suffer. In the center of this maelstrom stood Principal Sawyer herself, her usually impeccable appearance now showing signs of strain. Her hair, typically coiffed to perfection, hung limply around a face etched with the lines of sleepless nights and constant worry. Her eyes, once confident and commanding, now darted nervously from one crisis to the next. "We need to get ahead of this," she barked into her phone, her voice a mixture of desperation and determination. "Schedule a press conference for this afternoon. And where are we on that cultural sensitivity training?" As if in response to her demands, a harried-looking assistant burst through the door, arms laden with binders and laptops. "The anti-bullying task force is assembled in the conference room," he panted, sweat beading on his brow. "And the media. They're starting to gather outside." Principal Sawyer's face paled, the weight of public scrutiny pressing down upon her like a physical force. She moved to the window, peering through the blinds at the growing crowd of reporters and concerned parents milling about on the front lawn. Each face turned towards the school was an accusing finger, pointing out the failures and negligence that had festered for far too long. In the teacher's lounge, a space once filled with casual chatter and the aroma of burnt coffee, now buzzed with tension and fear. Educators huddled in small groups, their voices low and urgent as they discussed the impending changes and the uncertain future that lay ahead. Miss Thompson, a veteran English teacher, clutched her mug with trembling hands. "I never thought. I mean, how could we not have seen?" Her words hung in the air, a question that haunted every conscience in the room. Mr. Jones, the usually jovial gym teacher, slammed his fist on the table, causing everyone to jump. "We saw," he growled, his face a mask of shame and anger. "We all saw. We didn't want to believe it." In the gymnasium, a space typically alive with the sounds of bouncing balls and squeaking sneakers, rows of chairs now stood in solemn formation. A podium, hastily erected at center court, seemed to loom over the empty seats, waiting to bear witness to the public mea culpa that would soon unfold. The school's custodian, Old Joe, shuffled through the rows. His eyes, clouded with age but sharp with wisdom, took in the scene before him. "Ain't never seen nothing like this in all my years," he muttered to himself, shaking his head. "'Bout time, though. 'Bout damn time." Small groups of children huddled together, their young faces a mixture of confusion, fear, and tentative hope. The whispers of, "Did you hear?" and "What's going to happen now?" drifted on the breeze, a chorus of innocents grappling with harsh realities far beyond their years. Amidst this sea of uncertainty, Marcus and Zoe Wilson approached the school, their heads held high, their steps purposeful. The crowd parted before them, a mix of awe and gratitude in the eyes of those they passed. They were no longer just a father and daughter, but symbols of courage and catalysts for change. As they reached the main entrance, Marcus paused, his hand on the door handle. He looked down at Zoe, saw the strength and determination in her eyes, and felt a surge of pride so powerful it nearly overwhelmed him. "Ready?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Zoe nodded, her chin lifted in defiance of all that had come before. "Ready," she replied, her voice clear and strong. Together, they pushed open the doors, stepping into the maelstrom of change they had set in motion. The ordinary school day had given way to an extraordinary reckoning, a crucible in which the very foundations of trust, safety, and education would be forged anew. As they watched Mrs. Hartley in cuffs being taken away, for good, as Marcus and Zoe made their way through the transformed halls of Westbrook Middle School, they carried with them the hopes and fears of an entire community. The revolution had begun, and its epicenter was right here, in the heart of this once ordinary school. The world was watching, waiting to see if the promise of change would blossom into lasting transformation. And at the center of it all stood a father and daughter, united in their determination to build a better world, one courageous step at a time. Beside Marcus, Zoe sat perched on the edge of the stage, her legs swinging gently, her eyes wide with wonder as she took in the scene before her. As Marcus stepped up to the microphone, a hush fell over the crowd. The distant chirping of birds and the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze served as nature's own soundtrack to this moment of reckoning and renewal. "Friends, neighbors, members of our Westbrook family," Marcus began, his deep voice carrying easily across the park. "We gather here today not just to speak out against injustice, but to forge a new path forward, together." A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Eyes glistened with unshed tears, heads nodded in solidarity. The air itself seemed to thicken with emotion, each word from Marcus's lips a stone cast into still waters, sending ripples of change outward in ever-widening circles. As Marcus spoke of resilience in the face of adversity, of the strength found in unity, and of the unwavering hope for a better tomorrow, the park itself seemed to transform. The lush grass underfoot became hallowed ground, each blade a testament to the roots of community that ran deep beneath the surface. The towering oaks stood as silent sentinels, their leaves whispering ancient wisdom of survival and growth through countless seasons of change. In the crowd, faces both familiar and new reflected the spectrum of emotions Marcus's words evoked. There was Mrs. Gonzalez, the elderly neighbor who had brought Zoe cookies during the darkest days of their ordeal, her weathered hands now clasped in prayer-like reverence. Next to her stood Officer Johnson, his uniform a stark reminder of the system that had failed them, but his presence a promise of protection and change. Near the back, a group of Zoe's classmates huddled together, their young faces a mixture of solemnity and burgeoning understanding. Among them, Ethan stood tall, his shoulders squared with newfound courage, a living embodiment of the difference one voice could make. As Marcus's speech reached its crescendo, a flock of doves took flight from a nearby tree, their wings catching the dying sunlight in a breathtaking display. The crowd gasped in unison, many seeing in this natural occurrence a sign of hope, of freedom from the shackles of fear and silence that had bound them for so long. "We are not just here to talk about change," Marcus declared, his voice rising with passion. "We are here to change, to stand together, to lift each other up, to ensure that no child, no person in our community ever has to face discrimination or bullying alone again." A roar of approval swept through the gathering, a tidal wave of voices united in purpose. Hands reached out, grasping those of strangers turned allies in this moment of shared conviction. The very ground beneath their feet seemed to tremble with the force of their collective resolve. As Marcus stepped back from the podium, Zoe sprang to her feet, wrapping her arms around her father's waist in a fierce embrace. The crowd's cheers redoubled at this sight, many wiping away tears at the poignant reminder of why they had all come together. The sun, now a fiery orb sinking towards the horizon, bathed the park in a warm, ethereal glow. Long shadows stretched across the grass, intermingling and merging just as the lives of those gathered had become inextricably intertwined through shared purpose and understanding. As the formal proceedings drew to a close, the park transformed once more. Blankets were spread on the ground, baskets of food appeared as if by magic, and the air filled with the sounds of conversation and laughter. Children darted between groups, their play a joyous counterpoint to the serious discussions taking place among the adults. Marcus and Zoe moved through the crowd, shaking hands, sharing hugs, and basking in the warmth of a community united. The ordinary park had become extraordinary, a crucible of change, a birthplace of hope, a testament to the indomitable spirit of those who refused to be silenced or divided. As twilight descended, casting its purple hues across the sky, fairy lights strung between the trees winked to life. Their soft glow created an almost magical atmosphere, as if the park itself was celebrating this new chapter in Westbrook's story. The day was ending, but something new and powerful had been born. In this moment, in this place, a community had found its voice, its strength, and its shared vision for a better tomorrow. And at the heart of it all stood Marcus and Zoe Wilson. No longer just Marcus paused at the railing, his large hands gripping the sun-warmed wood as he gazed out over the neighborhood he had once taken for granted. Now seemed like a facade, a thin veneer of normalcy that had hidden so much pain and injustice. But in the golden light of the setting sun, Marcus saw something new emerging. A community awakened, united, and determined to change. The porch swing, where he and Zoe had spent countless evenings sharing ice cream and dreams, now cradled a different cargo. Each sheet of paper represented a voice once silenced, now arising in a chorus of solidarity and hope. As Marcus turned back to face the house, his eyes fell upon the family photos lining the wall beside the front door. In Zoe's smile, captured in moments of innocent joy, Marcus saw not just his daughter, but every child who had ever suffered in silence. In his own protective embrace, he recognized the universal call to action for parents everywhere. The screen door creaked open, and Zoe stepped out onto the porch, her curls catching the dying sunlight like a halo. She moved to stand beside her father. The contrast between them, his strength and her vulnerability, his wariness and her resilience, seemed to embody the very essence of their journey. "Are you ready, Dad?" Zoe asked, her voice soft but steady, no longer carrying the tremor of fear that had haunted it for so long. Marcus squeezed her hand gently, drawing strength from her presence. "As ready as I'll ever be, sweetheart," he replied, his deep voice rumbling with a mixture of determination and trepidation. Together, they turned to face the gathering crowd in their front yard. Parents, teachers, and community leaders stood in small clusters, their faces a mosaic of hope, curiosity, and shared purpose. The air hummed with quiet conversation, a stark contrast to the oppressive silence that had once shrouded their struggles. As Marcus descended the porch steps, the grass beneath his feet, still damp from an afternoon shower, released a fresh, earthy scent, a reminder of growth and renewal, of life persisting despite adversity. Standing before the assembled group, Marcus felt a momentary flutter of doubt. But then he felt Zoe's hand tighten in his, saw the encouragement shining in her eyes, and found his resolve. This was not just his story to tell, it was theirs, and it belonged to every parent and child who had ever felt powerless in the face of injustice. Friends, neighbors, fellow parents, Marcus began, his voice carrying across the hushed yard. Our journey began in darkness, in fear and isolation. But standing here today, I see the light of understanding in your eyes, the fire of determination in your hearts. As Marcus shared their story, the pain, the struggle, the moments of despair and triumph, the very air seemed to thicken with emotion. Tears glistened in the eyes of his listeners, heads nodded in recognition of shared experiences. It would have been easier to stay silent, Marcus continued, his voice gaining strength with each word. To convince ourselves that one voice couldn't make a difference. But when that voice speaks for our children, for their safety and their future, we have no choice but to let it roar. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Parents reached for each other's hands, forming a living chain of support and understanding. In that moment, the ordinary suburban yard transformed into hallowed ground, a crucible where individual pain was alchemized into collective strength. As Marcus's words painted a vision of a community united in protecting its most vulnerable members, the first stars began to twinkle in the deepening twilight. Each pinprick of light seemed to represent a child's dreams, now safeguarded by the unwavering commitment of those gathered below. Our children are watching, Marcus concluded, drawing Zoe close to his side. They're learning from our actions, not just our words. When we stand up, when we speak out, we teach them the most valuable lesson of all, that they are worth fighting for, that their voices matter, that they are never, ever alone. A profound silence fell over the gathering, broken only by the distant song of a nightingale, nature's own affirmation of the beauty and power of raising one's voice. Then, as if a dam had broken, applause erupted, washing over Marcus and Zoe in a tidal wave of support and solidarity. As the clapping subsided, replaced by the buzz of energized conversation and shared commitment, Marcus looked down at Zoe. In her eyes, he saw not just pride and love, but a reflection of the change they had set in motion. A future where as he speaks, the very atmosphere seems to crackle with potential energy. The rustling leaves of nearby trees whisper in agreement, nature itself lending its voice to this pivotal moment, bearing witness to a call that transcends the boundaries of this small community. Each of you, Marcus continues, his gaze sweeping across the sea of faces before him, holds within you the power to change lives, to stand up against injustice, to be the voice for those who have been silenced. His words paint vivid pictures in the minds of his listeners, of children finding courage in the face of bullies, of parents advocating fiercely for their little ones, of communities coming together to protect their most vulnerable members. The ordinary street corner becomes a crucible of transformation, where individual resolve is forged into collective action. Zoe steps forward, her young voice ringing out clear and strong. Sometimes it's really scary. But when we stand together, when we speak up, we can make things better, not just for ourselves, but for everyone. A murmur of agreement ripples through the crowd, punctuated by nods and quietly whispered affirmations. Marcus places a gentle hand on Zoe's shoulder, drawing strength from her courage even as he lends her his own. Our journey is just one of many, he says, his voice thick with emotion. All around us, every day, there are battles being fought, silent cries for help going unheard. But it doesn't have to be that way. But remember, Marcus says, his voice dropping to a near whisper that nonetheless carries to every ear. These aren't just stories. They're calls to action. Each tale is a reminder that we all have a part to play in creating a world where justice prevails, where the vulnerable are protected, where every voice is heard. So I ask you, Marcus says, his voice rising once more, filled with the fire of conviction, what will you do with these stories? How will you let them change you, inspire you, move you to action? The question hangs in the air, a challenge and a promise wrapped in one. The crowd stands motionless, each individual wrestling with the weight of personal responsibility, the call to be more than mere spectators in the fight for what's right. Because make no mistake, Marcus concludes, his words ringing out like a clarion call in the night. The next chapter in this ongoing story of courage and resilience. It belongs to you. Your actions, your voice, your unwavering commitment to justice. These are the things that will write the pages yet to come. As his final words fade into the night, a profound silence falls over the gathering. Then, slowly at first, but quickly gaining momentum, applause erupts. It's not the polite clapping of a speech well delivered, but the thunderous ovation of hearts ignited, of minds made up, of spirits ready to take up the mantle of change. A place where stories end and beginnings are born, where the torch of justice is passed from one hand to many, where the power of narrative transforms into the promise of action. We can all take action together and reach a wider audience. You can support this by liking, sharing, and subscribing to our channel.